Hey, and welcome to Less Than Amateur Theologian. It's good to be back. So, with all the stuff that's happening with Cologne and whatnot, I felt it's a good time to start up this channel again and really start focusing on some of the issues. And one of the issues I want to address today is Islam and how do we respond to them. So, I'm not going to go into the tenets of Islam or anything because that's definitely for another time. But how do we respond to them? In spite of what's happened in Cologne, in spite of what's been happening all over the world. And I want to address this in two ways. I first want to look at it as a humanitarian. Not that humanity or sociality or anything really guides what I think, but as a human, what should we be doing? What should our response be to these people that are committing such acts that are just outlandish and violent? What should we be doing? So, let's actually go back to this nice little time called the Second World War and look at what happened to the Japanese. It's interesting because the US took the Japanese and stuck them in internment camps. And they did this because they were afraid that the Japanese were going to side with Japan. They took they took and looked at the people who attacked Pearl Harbor and said this has to be indicative of every Japanese, even though we had Japanese serving in our armed forces. But because of one group of people, and yes, it was all of Japan we were against war with. I will admit that. But still, because of the group of people that were attacking, they said this is good reason for us to up and just decide that all Japanese are enemies of the U.S. And that's no way. That's not good. That's not good in the slightest. Here's something interesting about Islam, and it's similar to what we see with the race baiting that goes on. So, you ever watch the news? Who gets the most coverage is crime. It looks like the majority of crime comes from the African American community. So, as such, being a black person, people get the stigma that, hey, there's something wrong with you. But it's like Martin Luther King said that we need to judge everyone by their actions, not by the color of their skin, the content of their character, not their skin. And I bring this up because we also need to do the same thing with Muslims. Each Muslim is an individual. They're an individual person. And from a humanitarian aspect, we can't judge all Muslims by the actions of a few, even though it's only about, I've heard as low as 7% and I've heard as high as 10%. 10% tops of the Muslim community that is actually committing jihad and other stuff like this. So we need to consider carefully how we treat each of our Muslim neighbors. For me, I've got neighbors that are Muslim, great people. I mean, whenever there's been an issue or something like that, I just go up talk to them. They're like, "Hey, cool," and they come talk to me. We share an open dialogue, and it works very well. It's nicest people in the world, no issues with them, and they by no means are part of the terrorist organizations. In fact, one of my neighbors came from a war-torn country where they have land back there, but it's worthless because of all the factions and whatnot that are fighting. They actually devalued their land, and so he's seen firsthand what happens with this war, and he wants no part of it. He just wants to live the American dream of working hard and make money, get rich someday. So all Muslims are different. They're different people. There are good Muslims, bad Muslims, just like there are good Americans and bad Americans. The thing to consider is are we really going to punish the majority for the acts of the minority? And I would appeal as a human, say no. But I want to look at what the Bible says. And this is actually a good point for us to actually look into it and say, what does the Bible actually tell us to do? So I'm pulling from Matthew here, and just to give you in some quote, Jesus is giving one of his sermons here, all red text, all Jesus talking. And the preceding verse says, "You have heard it said that you should love your neighbor." Now, love your neighbor comes from Leviticus 19. And it's kind of funny because that comes right on the heels of a verse that other people just don't like for its repercussions against certain actions. But it says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, the hate your enemy is a colloquial thing. It's kind of like, God helps those who help themselves. It's something people say, but God never said. So love your neighbor and hate your enemies. So that was their social wisdom at the time. But then Jesus goes on and says, but I say to you. So this is his commandment, is love your enemies and pray for them that persecute you. Jesus is giving us a tall order here. He's telling us to love our enemies and pray for them who are persecuting us. And this is actually very interesting because when it comes to Muslims, even the terrorists we should be praying for. My prayer is that they come to recognize the true Jesus, not Isa, who says I did not die, but actually the Jesus who died on the cross. That is my prayer. But we're still to love them and to pray for them. Now, does this mean that we allow them to come in and, like the couple that were the couple whose farm was overrun by people taking advantage of them? Does this mean that? And I would give you an answer coming out of Luke here. So we're going to go to Luke 22 and in 38 here. And now to set this up here. This is at the time when Jesus is telling them, "Hey, I'm going to be killed soon." We'll zoom in for y'all. I'm going to be killed soon. So, what are we to do? And he's telling them, he says, now, 36, now let him who has a purse take it, him who has a wallet take it. And likewise a wallet, he that hath none, let him sell his cloak and buy a sword. So he's telling them, buy a sword. I say to you, it's written that which fulfills to come is in me. The reckon of transgressors for which concerneth me hath fulfillment. Okay? So from verse 36, and he's telling them this is all the fulfillment of what's coming from the cross. This is what's ahead of me. But now we move to verse 38. They say, Lord, behold, here are two swords. And Jesus says to them, it's enough. He's telling them to arm themselves, to protect themselves. There is a good case for us as Christians to protect ourselves, not necessarily to let people just come in and harm us. We're to do good to them. But if they're coming in, like Cologne, where they have young men coming in, groping the women and whatnot, sexually assaulting them and raping them even, that is a good case for Germany to protect themselves, just as we as Christians should protect ourselves and keep in mind that we're not to be the aggressors, but we are to defend ourselves. I would say this. Pray for them. You have Muslim friends? Pray for them. They will tell you things like, hey, we have Jesus too. No, they don't have the same Jesus. But pray for them. Keep them in prayer. They need all the prayer they can get. And as God offers opportunity, take time to minister to them. Tell them, expound who Jesus is. Expound who Jesus is. Take the time to really understand. And I would say some good resources. If you ever look up Jeff Durbin, James White, or even Dave Wood, those are some great apologists who have debated Muslim scholars. Watch some of their videos. It's really good to actually learn from them so you can find out the contradictions between what the Quran says and what the Bible says. Because therein is how you'll understand your Muslim neighbor better. You really seek to understand these people, but also keep guard of your family. Less than an amateur theologian saying thanks for watching, and God be with you.